So what happened after that then?
So our next family in, this is George Pope, who was a solicitor. So you can sort of track these people through the censuses from 1851 onwards. He makes quite a big difference to the estate, actually, because he bought up yet more land, and he's the person who built the lodge cottages. So there are 2 servants' cottages across the field towards the West Dean side, and there was a drive that went from the house across to the side of the lodge cottages. As soon as the weather gets at all hot in the summer, you see the drive reappear in the grass. You can see an absolutely straight yellow stripe across the estate, and that's the old carriageway, essentially, that was used to go over to that side and out past the lodge cottages. We also have him, I think, to thank for the tree planting that we were talking about. He did various other things as well. At that stage, there was still some farming going on, so he kept Kerry cows, apparently. The next family in kept Jersey cows. I'm not a cow expert. I don't know what really the difference between the two of those different activities are. But, so that was George Pope. And then we get the next family in are the Budgetts from 1889. They are a famous local wholesale grocery family. They were based in the Kingswood area, but lived out our way. And they owned large premises around Rupert Street, Nelson Street, Bridewell in the town centre. And actually the Budgetts are exciting because the wife of that family is the first woman who sort of has her own role that we can identify. So this is Georgiana Budgett, who would go on in the time of the First World War to be the founder and secretary of the Bristol Red Cross and to invent the Red Cross parcel. So the story is that she had a postcard from a Bristolian soldier telling her how horrendous conditions were in German prisoner of war camps, and she invented this idea of sending a parcel that was £10 in weight, full of food and clothing, and with a postcard in it so the prisoner could send it back and say that he'd got it and was still alive and so on. And by the end of the war, they were sending out 1,000 of these every week to British prisoners of war over in Germany, which is quite a dramatic explosion of that activity.
Yeah, another example of Bristol leading the way.
Bristol women, absolutely, out
absolutely.
there.
Well, we got to probably the turn of the last century, didn't we? Yeah.
Yep, so this is where we get a very sort of Bristolian industry being represented at Stoke Lodge. So Edward James, who was a tobacco manufacturer, he moves in with his family in 1897, and so the tobacco firm that he worked for was called Edwards, Ringer and Big, but it's one of 13 that merged a few years later to become Imperial Tobacco, which of course has, you know, a long history and connection with the city. But Edward James wasn't only a tobacco manufacturer, he was also a councillor, he was Lord Mayor twice, he was the High Sheriff, you know, he did all of the sort of city public life type of activities. And because of that, Stoke Lodge was used a lot for city events. So there's an incident that's recounted in the old newspapers. In 1901, they had 100 soldiers from a local veterans association who were entertained to a sumptuous tea at Stoke Lodge, and it says they indulged in a number of outdoor amusements with a formidable brass band playing popular music. And Edward, you know, because of his position in the city, when King Edward VII came to open the Royal Edward Dock at Avonmouth, it was Edward James who took the king there and was knighted on that occasion. So he obviously a very sort of public figure in the city. He had moved on just before that incident when he was knighted. He had moved on from Stoke Lodge, and the Fry family arrived. So we're talking about Fry's chocolate now. So again, another great Bristol industry, famous for inventing the Easter egg.
Oh,
as well as Fry's Turkish Delight. And they had a big factory again in the centre of the town on Union Street. So at that stage, it was him, his wife and 2 children, 6 staff living in the house and 2 families, the chauffeur and the gardener, living in the lodge cottages. So quite a lot of folk still sort of living and working on the estate. And again, Stoke Lodge played host to some pretty major city events. So After the First World War, Field Marshal Haig, who was the commander of the British forces on the Western Front in World War I, visited Bristol to receive an honorary degree and the freedom of the city, and he stayed overnight at Stoke Lodge. And then the lovely bit of this incident that I like is apparently the following morning, having had breakfast at Stoke Lodge with the Fry family, he walked down the hill and visited the village school, which is very sweet.
Oh, that's nice.
Yes, yeah, they're very lovely. So there's a newspaper account. It says, "The eminent soldier greatly pleased the children by visiting Stoke Bishop School," which is very sweet. And then really the final family who come into Stoke Lodge is a group of 3 sisters, the Butlin Sisters, from 1923. And pretty soon after they move in, they start reducing the estate to what we see today. So they sold off the farmland at the western end, the end down towards the Trim, and that became housing. So there was a great deal of expansion of housing going on at the time. They imposed covenants when they sold that bit of land. So the builders weren't allowed to build a factory, a steam laundry, a public house, or a lunatic asylum.
Oh,
very particular. Butlin
yes.
Sisters. They also rented or leased part of the land to the Stoke Bishop Cricket Club. And Stoke Bishop was the home of that club for many years, for getting on for 50 years. Their website, actually, the Stoke Bishop Cricket Club historical website, has some great old photos and some 1960s cine film of life around Stoke Lodge and local community coming together for a cricket match and so on. But their website points out that the pitch is quite unusual, possibly unique, in that there's a massive tree within the boundary of the pitch. So during a match, if a ball hit any part of the tree, apparently that was automatically 4 runs.
Oh, a special rule then?
Yes, absolutely, just for Stoke Lodge. But when the Butlin Sisters wrote the lease allowing the club to be there, one of the provisions was a ban on any noisy, rowdy or objectionable behaviour taking place by the cricketers or anyone else on the land. So clearly you had to behave yourself if you were going to play in the time of the Sisters.
Well, yes.
The other really interesting period, but one that's much harder to find anything out about, is World War II and what was happening around Stoke Lodge during that time. So we know that a lot of US soldiers were in the Stoke Bishop area and were billeted in local homes, especially in the run-up to D-Day. So they were working at Avonmouth, preparing the ships and the equipment to go over for the Normandy landings. And there were 3 Nissen huts that were installed on the field. So if you go on Know Your Place on that website that's run by Bristol City Council, there's a photo from 1946 and you can see the Nissen huts at the eastern end of the site. And actually, a couple of years ago when we had a really prolonged dry spell, again you could see the foundation marks of those huts reappear in the grass, so you could see exactly where they were.
Fascinating.
So I think they were used as recreation huts. Potentially there were some officers billeted in the house itself. Certainly there were officers at the Holmes up in the Botanic Gardens and various other of the houses around. But in particular they would be perhaps training there during the day and moving up and down to sea mills and working with the ships. So of these 3 sisters, one died in 1940 and another in 1946, which led the final sister to sell the property to the council. And there were various plans for what they might do with it. I think initially post-war there was a plan that they might have converted the Nissen huts for housing, but it turned out that was more expensive than was really viable. The house ultimately became a nursery nurses' college. Was that from about the early 50s for about 20 years? There are still people around who trained there and remember those days very happily.
Was this a bit like Norland nannies, but in Bristol?
Yes, yeah. It's lovely. But there is one copy of an old inspector's report of the Nursery Nurses College, so you can get a real flavour for the things that they were taught in order to be able to teach to their charges, which is an interesting slice of life. And then from 1970 it was the Adult Learning Centre. But alongside all of that, after the war, there was a big drive nationally and also reflected in Bristol to lay out playing fields and to have pitches because they saw it as an antidote to boredom leading to hooliganism and crime. So you get a lot of King George Memorial parks, for example. These were all laid out around that time, and it was all about, giving people something to do, a way to burn off energy and to go and play games. So pitches were laid out post-war, and then from the late 60s on, originally it was Fairfield School that was using Stoke Lodge for its PE lessons, and then from 2000 it was Cottam.
That seems incredible, because Fairfield School is a good 2 miles from Stoke Lodge.
Yes, I think it was slightly closer, so it has moved premises as well in that time. But yes, and Cottam now is 3 miles away. So, it's not a great solution for them because they actually spend longer on the coaches coming and going from Stoke Lodge than they do having PE. So, it's not an ideal place for them to have their pitches either. No. But no, it wasn't great for Fairfield back in the day either.
Yeah.